Ladies and gentlemen, we are so excited to welcome our keynote speaker for today, Professor Spiegelhalter. He is a renowned statistician contributing to the field of education, public health, and national security. So, to introduce our keynote speaker, we are pleased to invite to the stage Suhana Dewi Slamet, Khazanah's Head of Governance, Risk, and Compliance.
His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah, Ibn Al-Marhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah Al-Mufurla, Sultan of Perak. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In September last year, The Art of Uncertainty by Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter was published. Less than a month later, in October 2024, on day 2 of the Khazanah Megatrends Forum 2024, Nick Kaur told me that KMF 2025 was going to be on risk, and he knew exactly who he was going to invite as the keynote speaker. Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter, OBE, is Emeritus Professor of Statistics at the University of Cambridge and Chair of the Winton Center for Risk and Evidence Communication. He is also one of the most cited statisticians in the world, recognized as an ISI highly cited researcher, reflecting the global academic impact of his work across medicine, data science, and public policy. He served as president of the Royal Statistical Society, contributed to the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, or SAGE, and worked closely with the UK Statistics Authority on ensuring statistical integrity in public communication. His career has been defined by helping people, from cabinet members to the general public, helping them all understand evidence in a world full of uncertainty. Going beyond academia, Professor David has become a familiar and trusted voice, appearing in BBC radio shows, voice documentaries, TV interviews, as well as other media appearances and podcasts, helping millions understand complex statistical ideas in ways that are clear, honest, and often even entertaining. Professor David is also a celebrated author, and among his publications are COVID by Numbers, The Art of Statistics, and his latest, The Art of Uncertainty. In the years since the last KMF, it seemed that on some days the world has exploded with uncertainties. To explore how we can better navigate risk, doubt, and ambiguity, especially when the stakes are high, we are ever so privileged to have with us today Professor Sir David Spiegelhalter.
Okay, thank you so much, Suhana, for that kind welcome. And, well, it's a great honor to be here. I thought this was going to be a small, informal meeting. So I am slightly deluded by this and slightly terrified by this audience, this august and extremely, skilled and varied audience. So it's an enormous pleasure to be here. And that's me. As I mentioned, as Suhana mentioned, I'm also a non-executive director on the UK Statistics Authority, which is the body that oversees the official statistics in the UK. Okay, it's wonderful to be here in Malaysia. It's a dangerous country. I've been here 4 days, and I've eaten so much good food. I've got that on me. I've grown. I could hardly get my suit on this morning. I had to squeeze it on because we've been looked after so well here. It's been wonderful. Okay, so that's me. I should say that I'm not getting a fee for this talk, but Khazanah, no, that's deliberate. I'm not complaining, because Khazanah is very generous, giving a very generous donation to this charity that I support, which works with the marginalized communities in India and Nepal, particularly the Dalit and scheduled tribes. So I'm really grateful for Khazanah for that. Thank you. So, and that's the book. I mean, I've got to take advantage of being here to do a little bit of self-advertisement, and that's all the topics. And I can't talk. Could love to give a whole talk on luck, but I'm not going to. But I'm going to talk a bit about surprises and probability, and deep uncertainty, and communicating uncertainty, because I think that fits with the theme of this meeting. And the point is, are we in an age of uncertainty? Everyone, I think many people in the past have thought they're in an age of uncertainty. And I'm no historian, but when I think about, for example, the 1930s, the rise, the economic chaos, the rise of nationalism and militarism in the world, that was a really uncertain time, and it didn't end well. In the 1950s and 1960s, because there's a huge threat of nuclear war, from a technological advance that's been there, that actually looks like it ended up a lot better. And now, though, we've got the whole lot. We've got political, economic, technological, environment, and social, I should also say health, pandemic, risks going on, threats. Really, I think we are in an age of uncertainty. Very personally, the thing I'm most uncertain about is the effects of this thing. The fact that this is where most people now get their information from, the complete collapse of local and regional and national newspapers, the importance of rather obscure recommendation algorithms to what we all see, and especially young people see. So the impact of that, I feel, is deeply unpredictable. And of course, that's connected up with AI. So, but what is uncertainty? What is uncertainty? And it's this is the topic, this is the definition I like. The conscious awareness of ignorance is when we realize we don't know something. And we might not know about the future, we're used to not knowing about that, or the present, or the past, or why things happened. Now, we all live with uncertainty. Some deal with it better than others. Can I ask us a quick question? Who likes uncertainty? Come on, who likes it? Okay, no, there's a few. Okay, the rest of you, when you're watching a series on Netflix or something, you go straight for the last episode, do you, to find out what happened? When you missed a sports event live, you want to know the result rather than watching it. Okay, here's a question. Who would like to know when they're going to die? Come on, some, yeah, very few. Look, so the rest of you, you like uncertainty. We all like uncertainty. We live in a world of uncertainty. Can you imagine living in a world that was certain? It'd be like the worst sort of prison. It would be horrific. So we live in a world of uncertainty. We do like it. We embrace it. That's what makes us human. It's what makes being alive, not knowing what's going to happen. But it is a relationship between you and something else. It's very personal. And I'd like to just illustrate that a moment. I've got a coin, because uncertainty can be what's known as chance or aleatory uncertainty. So a UK coin has got a head on one side, the queen, or now the king, and a tail. And so if I've got a coin, here's a UK coin, so I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to ask, okay, what's the probability this will come up heads when I flip it? 50-50, thank you. That's chance, that's aleatory uncertainty. Then I'm going to flip it, cover it up. What's your probability this is heads? What's your probability this is heads? Now, we've changed what uncertainty is now. It's not chance anymore, it's decided, but it's what's called epistemic uncertainty. It's something you don't know. You could, I know, you don't. It's changed, but you're still uncertainty. So what's your probability this is heads? Come on, somebody say it. You're very grudging. You're very grudging. Well, logically, it should still be 50-50. That's your probability. You own it. It's not mine. So what I want to argue by that is that probability, in fact, can be used for, we'll see in a moment, epistemic uncertainty, things we don't know but could. So the uncertainty is very personal. It's what we own. We own this. And I believe that it's important to express, when we can, our personal, subjective uncertainty in numbers. I'm very mistrustful of words. And I'll give you an example, historical example from 1961. Remember in 1959, there was a revolution in Cuba, Castro took over, and almost immediately the CIA started planning an invasion by 1,500 Cuban exiles at the Bay of Pigs in the south of Cuba. And they trained them and armed them and so on, without telling the army or anybody else, or very, very few people. And when President Kennedy became president in 1961, it's the first he found out about it. He was told about this planned invasion that was going to happen. And he wasn't sure about this at all, and he commissioned the Joint Chiefs of Staff to do a report on this and whether they thought it was a good idea or not. And they didn't think it was a very good idea. They thought the chances of success were about 30%, so about 30 to 70% chance of failure, and they thought that. But for some reason, by the time the report got to Kennedy, that number had been changed to a phrase, a fair chance of success. What? Really? They meant not very good. That's not how I would interpret that, and I don't think it's how Kennedy interpreted it either. He approved the invasion, not just because of that. There was massive groupthink at the time. And of course, it was a complete fiasco. There's Castro himself jumping off a tank at the Bay of Pigs. All of exiles were killed or captured. It was an absolute mess and pushed Cuba closer to Russia and led, pretty well to the Cuban Missile Crisis the year afterwards, and the closest we've been to nuclear war. Absolute mess because of the way I think very strongly people afterwards said, why didn't we just say this is a really bad idea and say how risky we thought it was? Now, because words are easily misunderstood, that's a particular example, but every time we use words like could or maybe or perhaps, what do those really mean? And intelligence services have learned that it's best to at least roughly try to define what words mean. So if you're in MI5 or MI6 or the UK intelligence services and you use the word likely, you must mean between 55 and 75% probability. And the reason I know this is that I gave a talk at MI5. And they gave me this mug. That's all I got. Actually, no, I got some cufflinks as well. I got MI5 cufflinks, which is great. And so this says that, if your mug is 55 to 75% empty, it's likely or probable you need a refill. So, but look at this. This is what's nice. If it's 30% empty, it's unlikely you need a refill. If you think it's a 30% probability in the UK intelligence services, you must use the word unlikely. So they've learned for that. And it's not just them that's learned, in the US has learned as well, because 50 years later, another president was faced with a very difficult decision because there'd been intelligence reports that Osama bin Laden was in the compound in Abbottabad. Now, and what he did, though, this is really good, he set multiple teams to analyze the evidence and come up with a probability that he was there. Now, this is epistemic uncertainty. Either he was there or he wasn't, but he wanted a probability that they were there. Now, some teams thought it was only a 30 to 40% chance. They're really quite negative. Others were saying, yes, he's there 80 to 90%, very gung-ho. And he listened to all of them, and in the end he said, I think it's about 50-50, and he approved the raid. And afterwards, people have argued, academics have argued, should all those advisors have got together and come up with a single number to give to him? And I would strongly say that would have been wrong. The decision maker should know the disagreement and the variation in the teams that are advising him. Now, this miserable pessimists who thought only 30 to 40%, in other words, unlikely that he's there, using the UK definition, this could have been, I'm not sure, whether it was deliberately set up as a red team, a team that deliberately questions any groupthink. Now, the UK Ministry of Defence strongly encourage red teaming. And that's from their guidebook. Public guidebook on red teaming. You need a team that will challenge assumptions and beliefs, identify different options, stress test a plan, uncover hidden biases, try to get rid of that groupthink. And I suspect that in the UK Ministry of Defence in the past, they may have made some mistakes because they all were thinking the same way. So I think this is a really encouraging example. Okay, so I'd like to do a little quiz to you, I think. I would like to know whether you know how ignorant you are. Do you know how ignorant you are? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and there are true answers, A or B. And what you have to do, you don't need a pen and paper because you're all so clever, you can do this in your head. Think you're going to answer, you think I'm going to give you a question, A or B, and you have to say which one you believe is the most likely. But I don't just want you to guess which it is, I want to say how confident you are on a scale 5 to 10. So if you're absolutely certain, say I'm 10 out of 10 certain. So this is pure epistemic uncertainty. If you haven't got a clue, say 5 out of 10. And then I'm going to give you the answer, and then you can score yourself like this. So if you say 10 out of 10, I think it's 10 out of 10 answer A, and you're right, you get 25. If you're wrong, you lose 75. Yeah, it's really vicious, teacher, this one. It punishes failure ruthlessly. Ruthlessly. So you can see, and for the really clever people, try to work out the formula behind that. I'll give it to you at the end. Try to work out the neat formula behind that. Okay, let's start off with a question. Wait, no shush, no phones, no cheating, no conferring. Which head of state is older, President Trump or King Charles III? A or B, which one, if you had to say, which would you say? Which one would you bet? Well, you don't have to bet, but which one would you say, A or B? And then how confident are you in the answer? Have you done that? And the answer is? No. Trump is older than Charles. Yeah. If you said 10 out of 10 King Charles, you've got off to a really bad start, I'm afraid. A really bad start. Okay, next question. In the Malaysian National Risk Register, which is given a higher likelihood, droughts or wildfires? Now, if anyone knows this, you're doing really well if you know the Malaysian National Risk Register. Is droughts or wildfires considered more likely a threat in Malaysia? At the moment. Shh, 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 shh. Honestly, shush, you're worse than the school kids I do this with. Now, and the answer is, have you done your confidence rating? You thought that, okay, and the answer is B, wildfires. They're given level 6 likelihood. We'll see this later. I'll show you later. Okay, next one. And this is rather relevant to some people in the audience, which which Malaysian state has the bigger area, Johor or Perak? Shh, shh, shh. No going on to Wikipedia. Okay. This is quite, and your confidence in the answer, and what's the answer? B. Perak is slightly bigger. Slightly bigger. It's quite. I deliberately chose quite a difficult comparison there. There are some easy ones I could have done, but I wanted to make it difficult. Okay. Which is further north, Kuala Lumpur or Kota Kinabalu? Which is further north? Oh, these are Malay. You should know all these questions. No, you don't have to know. Okay, and your confidence, you've done your judgment, and the answer is B. About 3 degrees further. Yeah, I was thinking of doing Kuching, which is slightly south of Kuala Lumpur, but yeah. Okay, and finally, thinking of yesterday's marathon in KL, which had the most runners in 2025 for the full marathon? Not the 10K or anything, the full 42K, Hong Kong or Kuala Lumpur. In 2025, who had the biggest marathon in terms of the full 42K? Okay, and you made your judgment, and the answer is, yeah, it was Hong Kong, in fact, a slightly bigger marathon in 2025. Okay, so you've done that, you get the point. Now, I'm not going to ask you your scores. All I can say is if you ended up with a negative score, you'd have done better if you'd been someone who is totally ignorant and just says 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. I know, like a chimpanzee or something like that. So if you ended up with a negative score. So this may seem like a bit of a joke. This sort of exercise is not a joke. These sort of exercises are used to train intelligence analysts and other analysts to avoid being overconfident, to avoid being too cocky, to say, oh yes, I'm sure, when you're not sure. It gives you the insight. And this scoring rule is the one used for super forecasting competitions, when people are giving probabilities for future events. Has anyone found the pattern of the scoring rule? Anyone spotted it? Okay, the trick is to think, the most you can get is 25. So what you should do is think of what you're losing for each step that you're not completely right. So if you subtract each of those from 25, you get -1, working downwards, -4, -9, -16, -25, -36, 64, 81. What's the pattern? What are those numbers? The squares. It's 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared, 5 squared. So in fact, it's just squared error loss, which is used in standard sort of forecasting methods. It's squared error loss, and it was developed by an American weather forecaster, Breyer, in 1950. And this is the metric that's still used for evaluating weather forecasting, probabilities of precipitation, and as I said, it's the scoring rule used for in super forecasting competitions and for training intelligence analysts. I think this is a really valuable exercise. Okay, now, I've taught statistics and decision-making in theory for years. And what I've taught and what many of you may have learned in university is that the rational statistic, the theory of decision-making within rational economic behavior, you need to specify precisely all the options you're going to take, all the possible futures with their values, all the probabilities for those possible futures underneath each option, and then you calculate the expected value under each option, and you choose the option that maximizes the expected utility. That's what we're taught. That's the theory of rational decision-making, and it is nonsense. It's not nonsense. In simple situations, it can work. In really well-controlled, what's called small world situations. But in any realistically complex situations, this is unrealistic to think you can do all this. All these options, all these possible futures, things are changing all the time. Think of the uncertainty in the world today. And people quite a long time ago realized that this was very optimistic to think that you could specify all these things. And what this is also often associated with is this guy Frank Knight, who more than 100 years ago tried to distinguish risk from uncertainty. And he called risk the stuff you can measure, quantifiable, objective, either by dice or coins or anything like that, or from established statistics like insurance. And he distinguished that from uncertainty, which he called, when you've got subjective judgments, it's not susceptible to objective measurements. Okay, this is completely wrong. We've got to ditch that. People still talk about Knightian uncertainty. Economists still think in these terms. I think it's completely, this is 100 years old. Let's grow up. Because actually, it's not that. It's far too simplistic. We've got a continuum. All uncertainty is on a continuum, as I'll show in a minute. Every analysis, even a simple one involving dice, involves judgment. They are not objective. Everything involves analysis and judgment. And your assumptions behind your logic may very well be wrong. Can I just show you the coin I was flipping? Would you mind having a look at that and turning it over? Turn it over, and see what you see. Yeah, it's the same on both sides. It's a strictly illegal UK £2 piece with no head at all. And, you know, when you were so confident with your 50-50, weren't you, before I flipped it? No, you're completely deluded. You trusted me. Oh, no. No, that was a big mistake. So that even in those simple situations that you feel you understand, they're reliant on judgment all the time. We cannot escape it. So I've got this picture in my book which says, you know, what do we do when we can't do this ideal, rational decision-making? And if we could, we'd be up in this corner here. Now, the point about this, what this shows, is that assumptions about outcomes, well-defined, really clear outcomes, right through to, oh, who knows what's going to happen, what could happen. Here, probabilities, yes, we know really good probabilities, right through to we don't know. And it's a continuum. It's not yes, no. that we know or don't know things. Everything involves judgment. But roughly speaking, up in this corner, we've got where we kind of know what we're doing. We're pretty confident we can do some proper quantified risk analysis. Then we move into this quadrant. This is where the outcomes are fairly well defined, but we're not happy putting probabilities on them. And we're left with ranking or rough numbers, just possibilities. And an example of that is the Malaysian National Risk Register. So there it is. This is looking at impact along here. So that's severity of impact, and that's likelihood. So here we have the wildfires being more likely than the droughts. The tsunami is down here, huge impact, lowest likelihood. Floods up here, actually, reasonable, high likelihood with a strong impact. So that's pretty bad. So that's just a limited list of threats in the Malaysian Risk Register. The likelihoods here are not defined in terms of numbers. Because it's the first National Risk Register. It was similar in the UK. Now, the UK has gone through many iterations in their National Risk Register, and it's become a lot more complicated, as you can see. So, so this is one, and this is only part of it. So this is it's switched. So this is how likely things are, and this is how severe they are. And this is only the first list. It goes on and on and on. There's pages of them. Icelandic volcanoes, earthquakes, well, it's in there somewhere, I think. And you can look up each one. So, for example, if we look at assassination of... the other thing, they have malicious threats in here. So somebody has worked out that assassination of a major public figure, high-profile public figure, and they've put it here. So that says... they think there's a greater than 25% probability that in any 2-year interval, a major public figure will be assassinated. They also consider it's going to be of limited impact, which seems a bit... seems a bit unfair, doesn't it? But never mind. So, but of course, there have been major mistakes in this. 2010, Icelandic volcano erupted, closed European airspace. It wasn't even on the risk register, although people had suggested it. Before COVID, we had high profile was flu, but an emerging infectious disease like SARS and MERS was in the middle, and it said, it could kill up to 200 people. Instead of 200,000, which is what actually happened. So these risk registers, they're good, but they don't necessarily get it right at all. I think they're good to try to have them, but we cannot fully believe them. Okay, now we're getting on to the interesting stuff. Down in the corner here. This is where we don't know what's going to happen, what might happen, and we can't put any probabilities on it either. What do we do in that sometimes called radical uncertainty? I like the term deep uncertainty. And I think it's fascinating. We can't even list the possibilities for the possible outcomes. What are we left with? We're into the area of unknown unknowns, where we don't even know what we don't know. What do? We need humility to admit we don't know things and imagination to try to think of what might happen. We'd love to try to convert the unknown unknowns into the known unknowns. But that means having imagination and thoughtfulness, maybe engaging red teams to think of all the stuff we haven't thought of, getting a wide diversity of viewpoints. It also means it's hopeless to try to optimize. We mustn't try to optimize, because you can only optimize if you understand everything that's going on. And you can optimize your supply lines, and it's all, finely tuned, and then it can be so easily broken. It becomes completely unresilient, because what we should be looking for is resilience. And the other thing I say is we shouldn't just focus on the worst case scenario, because that will make us so cautious and so precautionary that we'll never do anything. We'll never take any risks. So we need to make decisions, of course, as I mentioned already, the importance of resilience. And resilience means, it's not the same as robustness. Resilience means that things can recover from events that we never even thought of. And that means redundancy. Having too much of things is never optimal. Okay, so what is the connection? Tonight, we're going to see magicians. What are the connections between magicians and him? Well, I'm sure you could think of many, but the one I'm trying to get at is For both, we should expect surprises. These are unpredictable. We know something's going to happen, but we know we haven't thought about it. It's very difficult to judge in advance what it might be, but we have to be ready for it. So expected surprises, I think, is a really good way to think of what we might be trying to do in an age of uncertainty. So when we need, as I said, we need imagination. We need to try to think of possible futures. And that means, of course, developing scenarios, as many of you will be familiar with. And we can always think forwards. Well, if this happened and this happened, what might happen in the future? But we need imagination to think of potential surprises, things that would be, and I think, again, red teams. We need people who are a bit different, who don't think like everybody else. The UK Ministry of Defence employs science fiction writers because they've got imagination. They can think of amazing events. There's a great story in here about a drone attack on London, written a few years ago, that is frighteningly similar to what Ukraine did to Russia. But then, once we think of those, we can think backwards, think of how could we get there, and how can we stop getting there? How could we actually get? So you can think forwards or think backwards, but you need imagination. Okay, the final quadrant, you may think, well, hang on, this means up here, where we say we can't list what's going to happen, and yet we can put probabilities on it. What? How can you do that? Well, I tell you who does do that, the Bank of England. Our central bank in the UK. It does that. When it's making its projections, it does a fan chart. This interval is 30, this is for growth, this is 30% interval, 60% interval, 90% interval. The rest is unassigned. Could be anywhere. They don't model the tails. So the final 10% is just assigned to something else. None of the above. Other. You imagine that in a survey. And you can see the importance of doing that because look what happened during COVID. GDP dropped 25% in a quarter. But the bank could say, well, we warned you. We just put 5% probability down here, and it could be anywhere down here. So it's a warning. I really like that idea, that you assign a certain probability to something else that we haven't yet completely thought of. And as a warning to encourage organizations to be resilient to the unexpected, to expect surprises. Okay, now the last part of my talk, I'd just like to quickly go through communication. First of all, there's no correct way to do this. That people say, oh, how can we communicate on risk and uncertainty, and which I use fairly interchangeably. And you say, oh, well, you need to work out who you're talking to, what you want them to understand, and then you need to test materials. And you need multiple layers of explanation. You have a top level to the gist, and then you have much more detail for the people who want to find it. You can use words and numbers and graphics because some people prefer others. But the overriding factor is trustworthiness. Now, this is a term, everything I do is about trustworthiness. And I'm influenced by a professor of philosophy, a Kantian professor, Nora Neal, because she argued, she's a huge influence in the UK, because in the UK, scientists say, how can we get the public to trust us? All our experts, all our institutions want to be trusted. And she says that's the wrong question. You've got it the wrong way round. You need to earn it. The institutions, the experts need to demonstrate trustworthiness, and then people may offer up their trust. So you should not try to manipulate people into trusting you. You should be trustworthy. That's number one. Duty ethics there. And as I said, I'm on the UK Statistics Authority. There's a Code of Practice of Statistics for the UK. It's an incredibly dull book, but never mind. Its number one pillar for official statistics in the UK is trustworthiness. That's the number one criterion for statistics in the UK. And that's influenced by a philosopher of Kant. Isn't that wonderful? I love it. So we try to think of what does it mean to be trustworthy when you're communicating about risk and evidence and so on. And we came up with 5, we wrote a paper in Nature, we came up with 5 main points, which I think are pretty good. You should be trying to inform rather than persuade people. Not trying to manipulate their emotions. You want to inform them, to empower them to make better decisions. You need balance. Winners and losers, positives and negatives, but not false balance, not climate change, yes, no, it's not 50% there. You need to be upfront about uncertainties. You need to be clear about how good your evidence is. And the fifth one is interesting. It says that you need to preempt the misunderstandings. You need to be able to say, yeah, we got our evidence. It does not mean this. Trying to head off the misinformation. Try to get in there first before people start misinterpreting it, which I think is really important. Okay, we put this into practice during COVID. If you remember the AstraZeneca vaccine, this was in April in the UK, was started to be associated with some very nasty blood clots in the brain. And we were brought in to do the communication for this to the public, to help the Deputy Chief Medical Officer do that. And we came up with this graphic after a lot of time. And so basically this says that you've got the benefits on one side and the harms on the other. And it split it by age, because in COVID, age was the overwhelmingly important thing. It was never discussed enough. But it means that for older people, I was in that age group, it's really clear what the benefit-harm balance was. Jab it in me. But as you got younger, the benefits dropped very rapidly. The benefits of vaccination for young people were very low. But the harms increased, because these clots tended to happen in younger people. So after a while, they get finely balanced. And so it was announced that they're no longer giving the vaccine to people under 30, and later it was extended to under 40. So it's quite a complex graphic, but Jonathan Van Tam explained it to the public live on the BBC, to everybody. He took his time over it. He treated the audience with respect as intelligent people, and it went down brilliantly. No accusations of U-turn. Everyone liked it. And for us, our biggest credit for that is that everybody copied it. You know you've done a good infographic when everyone copies it. You know, and some of them messed it up, I think. They made it worse. But never mind. Everyone copied the idea. So it's the balance of benefits and harms. We didn't include the uncertainty because we thought blurring the blobs would have just confused people at that stage. Okay. Finally then, communicating in a crisis is somewhat different. And I find these inspirational figures that I've known, and this is Lord Krebs, in fact, and he was head of the Food Standards Agency when we had disaster after disaster. We had foot and mouth disease, we had mad cow disease. He had to deal with so many disasters, it was hopeless. And he came up with a way of communicating to the public that I think should be on the wall of everybody dealing with risks. I think it should be tattooed on people. He said that what you have to say to the public is, first of all, what we know. Yep, we know this. We're confident about it. Then you immediately say what we don't know. You admit to the uncertainty immediately. Then you say what we're doing about it, the research we're doing, the surveys and things like that. And then you say what people can do in the meantime to be on the safe side. They may want to be precautionary. Maybe they don't want to eat beef or something like that for a while. Then, and this is the most important one, he says, our advice will change. We will come back to you. It's what I call provisionality. We can say things at the moment, things will change. Politicians find it impossible to do this. They cannot admit provisionality. They have to say everything they do say has to be the final word. They cannot say, well, we're doing this for a while and then we'll change. They cannot admit this. And so in the UK, we were left still, spraying surfaces and things like that a year after people knew it wasn't of any value from the science. And so I think this is incredibly important, the provisionality of advice, to be able to have the courage to do that and the humility. So finally, handling uncertainty, it's a mixture of formal analysis and judgment. You cannot escape the use of judgment. In psychological terms, it's both thinking fast and slow, in Danny Kahneman's terms. Very good to engage multiple perspectives, to have a red team approach. You've got to expect surprises. You need people who can think of what surprises there might be. You need imagination for this. Rough numbers, better than no numbers. And trustworthy communication of uncertainty, vital to everybody. Okay, just one final thing. Why this cover? People ask me, why have you got a double-yolked egg on this cover of this book? I think it's a beautiful book, but why have you got double-yolked eggs? Well, it's because once I bought a box of eggs, and 6 of them, all of them were double-yolked eggs. We'll buy boxes of eggs in 6s. Look, they're all double yolks. Look, there's me. I'm about to have a massive omelette. It's going to, that's why I take my statins, that. And if you look at this in the newspaper, it says, oh, this is a 1 in a million chance. This is nonsense. Another bit of nonsense, another bit of bad risk analysis, because if it was that rare, it would never happen. Yeah, I bought one. That's never going to happen. And do you know why I know this is nonsense? It's because I bought a box of double yolked eggs. So question your assumptions all the time. Somebody may be trying to fool you. And if you go onto the web, you can get them at Tesco's and Waitrose. You buy them. You can buy double yolked eggs because you can hold them up to the light and spot them. So be really wary of these claims of risks that you may be facing. Okay, so thank you very much. We were going to hope. Oh, we got a bit of time for questions. Yeah, it's great. So, Hannah, you're going to look after me. Good.
Hello. Yeah. Well, that was just fantastic, Professor David. I enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much. Even before you ended your talk, I already got online questions.
Oh, right, great. Yeah.
And such a great one. I've got several.
Yep. Let's see if we can get through a few.
Okay, we don't have much time.
Yeah, I'll crack through them.
Okay. In your experience, this is a great one. The organizations that you have worked with, what have they done to try to increase trustworthiness that hasn't worked?
Oh, that hasn't worked. Oh, because I know some things that are working about being open and transparent and honest about mistakes, owning up to mistakes. Well, I think that's a good question. What is, because people are worried about it backfiring. You know, if we're honest and open to everybody, we open ourselves up to criticism by the media or others can pick on us because we've admitted some vulnerability, we've had some humility. In my experience, it's worked. Yeah. And we've done research on this that you know, if you are open and transparent and admit that balance, and obey those sort of rules that use messaging in that way, that the people who are most skeptical of you trust you more. Because finally they're having their concerns addressed. I mean, the vaccine is a good example because the standard message in the UK is vaccines are safe and effective. You should take them. That is untrustworthy because actually vaccines, as I showed, vaccines are safe enough and effective enough to be used by some people in some situations. That's the truth. And if you just tell people vaccines are safe and effective and then they get COVID or then they're harmed by the vaccine, why should they believe you anymore? So I think that's where I've seen the failures, where people just repeat a simple message as if the audience people are children, and then it's so easily proven to be wrong, and you've just actively lost trust. Yeah. So I'd love to think, the fact that I can't think of an example of a failed attempt to be trustworthy, maybe that's just maybe I've just blotted it out and not to, but as far as I can see, it works.
Okay. Another question. We have a little bit of time. How does AI and LLMs affect thinking of the uncertainty and risk projections? More certain or just another voice in a team?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think of it always just another voice. First of all is that LLMs are terrible at expressing uncertainty about their claims. I used to work on uncertainty in AI. We thought we'd solved it. And now it's all gone backwards because they have hallucinations, they think of confident claims. When they're talking about facts, you can't trust what they say, you have to check it. But when it comes to projecting about the future, I'm still not quite sure, and I think this is changing, the extent to which LLMs have imagination. You know, will they be as good as the science? Will they be able to think of things that, will they act as a red team, essentially? Will they be able to think of things that we are not currently thinking of? Will they be able to be like the science fiction writers? I think that would be really exciting if they could have that imagination, so they could actually think of things that people hadn't been thinking of that could go wrong, which then could become part of our scenario planning. I am not sure, maybe somebody here knows, I don't think they're capable of doing that, because at the moment, they just, in a way, summarize what's out there already. They would need original thought. they're incredibly, I use them all the time for coding and for summarizing arguments and exploring arguments. So they might be really good at listing the suggestions that had already been made out there. So in that sense, it's another voice, a well-informed, a well-read voice who's read the internet, knows what the possible problems are. Whether they could think of something that someone hadn't thought of before, I'm not convinced they could do that yet.
Okay, and so then the final question perhaps, how do we mitigate the downside risks of unknown unknowns, especially in this geopolitically turbulent era?
Well, I've only got a minute, for heaven's sake. I mean, that's what we're all here for, isn't it? Yeah. So how do we deal with that? And that's my sort of magician and Trump example of where you've got something that's actually is deliberately unpredictable, almost, that you just cannot list what might happen. Well, I think the mitigation is this idea of resilience, that you have to build in strategies that should enable you to recover or even really benefit from situations that you have not thought of yet. So it's protecting yourself against possibilities that you haven't even imagined yet. But you don't want those to happen. You would really like not to be surprised.
So this is another question, 11 seconds to go. And that presupposes that you have already fallen before you can get up. And so that tolerance for error and mistake. Care to say?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the acknowledgement that you're never going to get everything right, and that again comes of the fact that you cannot optimize. You could always look back and say, we could have done this better, we could have done this better, but no, that's not the point. The point is that you can never optimize. You always have to be in a situation which can be stable and sustainable under threats that, from a wide range of threats that you haven't even included. So it's not fair to look back and say, oh, we could have avoided all that stuff, unless it was an obvious mistake. You have to admit that there will be things that didn't go completely as well as they could, and you learn from them, and you improve afterwards.
A little humility.
A little humility. I quite like, I put that in just this morning, the humility and imagination, because I'm trying to summarize what the message of all this is, and that for me is the message.
Thank you so much, Professor David. We've had such an excellent session this morning, and our time is up. Please, thank you, David, for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.